Hi there, folks. Next up on This Week in Law, we're going to talk with Professor Mark Bartholomew, author of ADcreep. We're going to talk about the advertising industry in general and specifically the great location data reporting done by the New York Times this week. We'll look at brain scans and marketing. Did Congress do enough with Sundar Pichai this week? And is that Maria Callas on the stage or not? All this and more next on This Week in Law.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiL.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise, Howell, Stefan, Szpajda, and Matt Curtis. Episode 446, recorded December 13th, 2018. The Neuroscience of Cheetos. Hi, folks. I'm Denise Howell, and you're joining us for This Week in Law. We're so excited today that you've joined us because we have a lot of information that might not be that upbeat, but it's very important and necessary. And it has to do largely with online advertising and largely with our guest's book. Our guest today is Mark Bartholomew. He is a professor. He teaches law at the University of Buffalo School of Law. And he has written the book, ADcreep. Hi, Mark. Great to see you.
Hi, Denise. Great to be here.
Mark has clerked for the Ninth Circuit out here in our neck of the woods in California. I was curious who your judge was, Mark.
So Cynthia Holcomb Hall. She's unfortunately no longer with us, but yeah, I had a great year in Pasadena working for her in the Ninth Circuit.
That's right. And then at one point or another in your bio, it says you were deputy county counsel in Sonoma County, which is very close to where our studio is in Petaluma.
Oh, yeah. I miss it. I worked in Santa Rosa, and I used to drink really good wine back in the day that was close by to where I worked.
That's all they do in the studio as far as I can tell. Also with us, and not quite so much in the wine growing regions of the world, is Stefan Szpajda, who's a lawyer at Dorsey & Whitney in Seattle, Washington. Hi, Stefan, great to see you.
Hello, Denise. Hello, Mark. In fairness to Washington's wine industry, I think it is the second biggest in the U.S. So It's not nothing. It's not Santa Rosa, but it's okay.
Okay. Absolutely. No, absolutely.
I sound like a defensive provincial there, but I couldn't help it.
Oh, I know. And Southern California and Central California would yell at me as well because they also grow quite a bit of wine. Okay, so Mark, I wanted to talk for a moment before we get into the stories in our rundown today, just about the state and the development of the world of online advertising, because I'm really enjoying your book, much as it's terrifying me. But it's also making me reflect on the fact that back in the year 2000 or so, this book was published, the Clue Train Manifesto. And I wonder if you ever read it, Mark.
I haven't actually. I've heard of it, but I never read it.
Right. So for others like Mark who maybe haven't read that book, it was this call to action at the time, again, sort of calling to task the advertising industry, but they're calling it to task for treating people like commodities and for pretending that companies aren't made up of people. And the tagline from the book is "Markets are conversations," and the positive note that it left one with, and the call to action and the reprimand that it gave, had to do with the fact that, you shouldn't market to us as though we're just little widgets to buy your things. You should figure out what we really want. You should get to know us well, and we should get to know you well as companies too. And we should have these ongoing, very trust-laden relationships with one another where we can trust you and you can trust us to do the right thing if you're doing the right thing. So it was this both wake-up call, I think, to the advertising industry and clarion call to the technology industry that we've got to make this happen. We've got to make markets conversations so that people can live in this world where we all acknowledge our humanity and yet have commercial relationships with each other. fast forward to your book, where things have gone much in a different direction. Can you kind of explain how the vision of the Clue Train manifesto went off the rails?
Yeah, that's a great departure point, right? I guess kind of be careful what you wish for. So
yeah,
I think one thought is the old version of the advertiser, the Don Draper, would kind of come in and give a pitch and sort of, here's what people need, here's what people want. I don't need to have a lot of data. I don't need to have focus groups. I can just kind of, go with my gut and give people something captivating. I'll create art. And I think we've moved in many ways 180 degrees from that. Not that there's not great art in advertising at all anymore, but we've moved into what's the best way to understand the consumer? It's 24/7 omnipresent surveillance. We will just, try to use every tool at our disposal to know exactly what the consumer is doing at every moment, from watching what they do online to, as I talk about in the book, even taking neural scans of what's going on in their brains when they see logos, just not taking their word for it, not trying to interpose what the advertiser thinks they should want, but actually just kind of trying to just study them like a subject in the zoo to figure out what's needed. And, by itself, that's not completely problematic. I think it's good to know your customer. That's something that businesses have always wanted to do, but there's always been sort of a balance. There's a bit of a competition or a battle between a consumer and a business. We're haggling over whether we need this, what the price should be, and so that competition has to be kept at a certain level, or the asymmetry involved gives someone a particular advantage, an ability to really hold it over the other side. And I think what we're seeing now on a variety of fronts, but particularly leveraged by big tech, is the asymmetry is just tipped in favor of the advertiser. When there's a map of what you do, how you feel, and we can bundle all these things together in one enormous file about a particular targeted consumer, then one side really has an advantage over another.
Right. Do you feel like the impetus to get online and begin having conversations has gone in a direction where the authors of Clue Train might have hoped it wouldn't? That there was a dark aspect to that invitation to share more about yourself that folks at the beginning of the 2000s maybe didn't foresee?
I think so. Yeah, I think sharing comes with costs and benefits, and maybe just a couple points on that is one is that in 2000, and particularly even before 2000, there's this idea that what we did online. We could dialogue with businesses, we could dialogue with advertisers, but we wouldn't be dialoguing in a way that would be part of our permanent record. So you could go online and give your thoughts, maybe anonymously, maybe under a pseudonym. You wouldn't be tied to that forever, and there's a certain freedom in that. And we've changed that now. If you look at the business model and just take Facebook, what they very much encouraged is one identifier that's tied to a real person and no others. So there's not an opportunity to play, maybe kind of camouflage who you are. The sharing comes at a certain amount of cost. And I think that's probably different, at least in a way, than maybe what the authors were thinking about in 2000. And then the other thing is I don't think we quite realized some of the costs of sharing. So sharing, can have implications for your privacy. There's a tendency of people to kind of overestimate short-term gains and underestimate long-term costs. And I think we see that kind of over and over again in the digital space. Also, the way these online platforms have been configured, we're sort of conveying our thoughts and sharing to audiences that we're not quite sure the scope of. I think maybe you talked about in your last last broadcast about people pulling away from social media and just having these kind of defined group chats. And I think that's a response to just the discomfort we have with appealing to these super publics or saying things online, and we're not sure if it's going to 10 people or 100 people, or if it's going to engage an army of trolls. And I think that's probably something that just wasn't very much on the radar of people in 2000 when they were envisioning, talking with consumers.
Right. And even if you were posting to a blog back then, as opposed to on some social media platform that was then the custodian of the data, you were posting publicly, but you still didn't have a recognition of how that could then be repackaged, or how if you moved away from an independent publishing platform into sort of a data silo, what new and interesting uses of your data could be made. And with that, I think we'll let me ask Stefan, do you have any thoughts on sort of our overview conversation before we jump into our topics for the day?
It's such a rich topic, and the general introduction I thought was great, and I don't have much to add to it other than to say that I'm very excited to dig into some of the details, because I think the way in which our internet presence and social media identity affects how we're marketed to, I think is just such a fascinating contemporary problem that I'm excited to talk about it today.
Okay, then of course we're going to start with our privacy stories. This week, the New York Times dropped some detailed reporting on location data. The piece is called "Your Apps Know Where You Were Last Night, and They're Not Keeping It Secret." I'm hoping you both had the chance to read through this and digest this, and I'm hoping our listeners have too. And if you haven't, definitely take the time to read this piece, because I guarantee you, even if you're steeped in this stuff and feel like you know it really well, you're going to be surprised by something you read in here. So I thought I would, since I feel like we know this space pretty well, I thought I would start out by asking you both if you read through this and found anything surprising. Mark, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's just great reporting. I think something that surprised me in a way was there were two ways to identify people based on location, or two kind of sensitive areas. And one was going to sensitive places, like going and sleeping at an ex-boyfriend's house, or I think going to Weight Watchers is one of the examples they gave. Maybe things that you didn't want to advertise. But then also it was just kind of the category of sensitive people. So in various formats, I've seen how we can identify people, and even if their personal identifying information isn't disclosed, that can be kind of easily traced through other channels. If you go from your house to this school and back every day, it's pretty easy to find out through public records who you are. But the other thing that was surprising, something in the article talked about, they just found in this data set, we know these people are at the inauguration. We know they're right on the dais next to President Trump, potentially even being able to say exactly where, very important high-placed government officials are at all moments of the day. And I think that's a little surprising and frightening. We've heard stories about how the president doesn't really take perhaps the best measures to safeguard privacy using his phone, but it surprised me that they were able to pinpoint other people surrounding him with the same technologies as well.
Yeah, those are great things to call out. How about you, Stefan? What were you surprised by in here?
I think that it was, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it was something like 14,000 check-ins for one user, where they were able to kind of pinpoint the location to such a granular level of detail that I actually didn't realize that the apps were checking quite so often and creating such a real-time, traceable footprint. So I guess I always kind of knew that this was happening, but I didn't think about the number of apps that are doing this and how some of the unpopular ones that are doing it are, less scrutinized. People don't think about quite so much. And they may have tons and tons of these just sitting on their phone that they're not really using that are still contributing to this. So it's not so much any one aspect of it, but I think the aggregate effect, coupled with the fact that it really isn't regulated in a meaningful way. I think the way the story presented it made it rendered in stark relief in a way that hadn't, I don't think, been covered in mainstream media in the past.
Right. I think that latter point you just said is something that would surprise a lot of people, that it's not regulated in any meaningful way. And that's why companies are allowed to do this kind of thing. I had three things that surprised me. One was the scale, and you alluded to that, Stefan. Here's a quote from the piece. At least 75 companies receive anonymous, precise location data from apps whose users enable location services to get local news and weather or other information. The Times found, that's what they found. Several of those businesses claim to track up to 200 million mobile devices in the United States, about half those in use in the last year. The database reviewed by the Times, a sample of information gathered in 2017 and held by one company, reveals people's travels in startling detail, accurate to within a few yards, and in some cases, and I think this is what you were referencing, Stefan, updated more than 14,000 times per day. So the scale is just staggering. The other thing that really sort of socked me in the chest was just how bad the just-in-time disclosures are, just how not revealing of what, and the article is a lot about apps as opposed to websites, what the app is going to do with the information once you click OK or authorize location data sharing. Most of the disclosures say something about, we're collecting your location data to be able to offer you interesting related services in your area, something like that, or weather in your area, or what have you. And they don't require you to go read the detailed policy and know exactly all the other things that they're going to do with the data. So just how, misleading, I guess, or incomplete, maybe is a more generous term, the just-in-time disclosures are. And then finally, my biggest surprise, one of my biggest surprises is some of the uses that the data was being put to that I hadn't even thought of before. One of them being, there's a great segment in the piece talking about how even though these companies are quick to tell you they're using anonymized data and trying to find trends, if you're an investment company or a hedge fund, for example, you can buy anonymized data about, say, a potential target investment company and its workers and find out who's on the factory floor and who's away from the desk and who's at the desk and use that kind of data to make conclusions that might guide your investment. Of course, we've talked lots on the show about the ramifications of having your health data in the hands of health insurers trying to make educated guesses about what kind of a risk you are. Anything else that you want to add about this article and how it might dovetail with your book, Mark?
Yeah, well, maybe just to follow up on those points both you made is, so I called the book ADcreep, and I like using the word creep in there because I think it suggests two things. One is that these advertising strategies and technologies are creeping. They're moving incrementally into different spaces and territories and areas of our life. But the other meaning of creep is just it's creepy. And a lot of times when I talk to people about new advertising or new advertising strategies, they'll kind of say, "Oh, that's creepy," and then we'll move on. But I think that word creepy deserves, it means we should interrogate things a little bit. So what's troublesome about this? I think there's a couple things we could unpack. One is, you mentioned the hedge fund use, right? These apps, and there were things like weather forecast apps and local news apps. Not only are the disclosures lousy, but I think that a lot of people would kind of object to giving this data for free to a hedge fund, to the fat cats to use to make even more money for the people, while the rest of us don't have an opportunity to invest in those hedge funds. And then we can see other things from this. It's definitely clear from research I've seen that location-based advertising works. People have more interest in it. When people see ads that are based on location tracking, they respond more warmly to them. There's a greater intention to purchase. So that fight I discussed between the advertiser and the consumer, this is a way, again, for the advertiser to have another advantage. But one thing I got from the article really was that what it started out with as, it'd be great if we could see where you're walking, and right when you walk past this pizza parlor, we'll send you a digital coupon for the pizza parlor. And that still happens. But it seems to me that the main value of this is just like a lot of things that involve digital surveillance, is just recording the information over and over, 14,000 times a day, like Stefan said, and bundling into these larger profiles so we can just understand who you are. You can tell a lot about a person if you're tracking their movements 14,000 times a day.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up coupons, because that's another thing that comes up here is how much, the paper coupons that people are used to from, around when I was born and shortly thereafter, give you a discount and get thrown away. The digital coupons give all kinds of information, what sort of phone you're using, what sort of operating system that phone is using. They track your purchases. It's a much more detailed ecosystem. And there's specific discussion of Target and Walmart and how they're able to aggregate so much data from this whole arena of digital couponing, which again was something that took me by surprise. I really hadn't thought through the data aspects of that, but it's something we all should be doing. So let's move on to some other specific stories, but any final thoughts on this, Stefan?
Yeah, the other story that I think came out maybe 2 or 3 months ago that was quite similar to this, and in some ways even more startling, was there was the app Strava was being used by soldiers stationed in various bases around the world, and they were going for runs and sort of tracking their path, and in the course of doing so, they were revealing secret locations of where U.S. troops were stationed, and I think it just sort of fell between the cracks. Nobody had thought about this, and all of a sudden there's all these bubbles of activity where nobody really knew why all of a sudden there'd be all this data being generated. And I think what that spoke to, I think, in a way that this New York Times story didn't, is the sort of accidental nature of some of this stuff. Like, I think you read the New York Times story and you get a really sinister feeling, and I think that's on purpose. And maybe you should get that feeling. But I think a lot of this is just people not really paying attention and just maximizing whatever business objective they have, and then there's this unintended consequence, and all of a sudden you've revealed the location of a secret base. And I think it does help sometimes to take a step back and think about well-intentioned, not necessarily nefarious action still having bad consequences as a further justification for taking a regulatory framework a little bit more seriously. Because it's if you cast these people as villains, then there's a defensiveness to the conversation of, well, we're just business people, we're not trying to do anything wrong here. And that might be true, and you could still cause harm. And so I think with that in mind, I think the one sort of reservation I had about the story is that I think it creates this sort of us and them mentality that we're just people trying to live our lives, and who are these evil marketers trying to track us. And I think that's not quite the right framework, I think, for thinking about this in every situation.
Yeah, that's a good point, and a good segue to our next topic here, which is chapter 5, I believe, of your book, Mark, about brain scans and research and marketing. And you begin that chapter by telling the story of A.K. Pradeep, who had a company called Neurofocus that decided that traditional kind of market research was probably not as effective as trying to know what's actually going on in somebody's head. And I feel like, this was probably a brilliant insight. And he did an assignment for Frito-Lay where they began investigating the neuroscience of Cheetos. And I think that my take on this is it sort of dovetails with what Stefan was saying, that trying to be more effective and deliver people things they actually want probably has value. But I think we've gone from creep to creepier when we start marrying brain scans with marketing. Why don't you tell us more about this landscape, Mark?
Sure. And maybe I'll talk about the Cheetos story in a little bit more detail. It's one of my favorites. So, kind of the classic problem advertisers have always had is there's this famous quote from John Wanamaker, who started the first big department store, and he says, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half. So there's been this frustration about, well, I just don't know what works and what doesn't. And so part of this is just that consumers are unreliable. Part of the time, they don't want to tell you what they're thinking because they might be embarrassed or they don't think it's socially appropriate. Part of the time, just not in touch with ourselves enough to know what really motivates us when we're in the marketplace. And so folks like Pradeep and other so-called neuromarketers have in mind is what we can do is we can take relatively new technologies, functional magnetic resonance imaging, EEG, recording electrical impulses on the scalp, and we can determine how your brain reacts to different kind of advertising stimuli. And that will tell us what you're really thinking. That will give us the real inside story. And so one of these examples is a product campaign for Frito-Lay, for Cheetos, where they took people and they asked them, well, what do what's good and what's bad about Cheetos eating? And what they said is, well, Cheetos taste great. We all know that. I don't like it when the little orange cheese dust gets in my fingers. It's kind of sticky. It's gross. I don't like that. But when they ran people through fMRI scans and showed them images of all sorts of different content as far as Cheetos, supposedly what they saw was a pleasurable sense in people's heads when they saw the cheese dust on the fingers. And so Frito-Lay said, we're not going to listen to what the people said. We're gonna watch and see how people reacted. And they engineered a campaign that tried to leverage kind of the subversive sense people felt. Perhaps it takes them back to their childhood or breaking the rules. I don't know, but something about orange cheese dust on your fingers is positive. And they tried to use that in a new campaign. And at least if you believe Pradeep, it goosed Cheetos sales by $47 million in just a year.
Oh my goodness. I think we're going to have to make positive cheese dust our first MCLE passphrase for this episode of This Week in Law. We put these phrases in case you are watching or listening and thinking that you might want to apply for professional credit in your field. If you're a lawyer, if you head on over to twit.to/MCLE, you'll get some more information about where you might look for forms in your jurisdiction, or if it's even an option that just applies to the US. We'll put another phrase in the show at some point further on so that you can write these down and, if necessary, trot them out to demonstrate that you actually watched or listened to the show, because they're going in completely at random and they are triggered by wonderful turns of phrase, generally by Stefan or Mark. So keep an eye out or an ear out for the next one. All right, so one of the pieces in our rundown, Mark, talks about marrying brain scans with virtual reality for marketing purposes. Did you get the chance to take a look at that?
I did.
And what do you think about that unholy duo?
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense, right? The more you can kind of track people, track their thoughts, their biological changes in an immersive, realistic environment, the better data you're going to get. So one kind of knock on neuromarketing, and this has been going on for a while, and they would do things like they'll scan people's brains to show them the Super Bowl commercials and try to offer data about those commercials, within a day or two after the Super Bowl. But the problem is that it's hard to recreate real-world shopping conditions inside an MRI machine, right? It's confining. It's not how the real world works. But as the piece you pointed out suggests, well, if we can watch people while they're in this immersive virtual reality experience, is it a thing that looks like an actual store, or is it, does it mimic the kind of behavior people really have in their daily lives? Then you're getting better information. It's not so artificial. So this makes sense to me. The more you can kind of, make things seem like the real world while you're getting information from consumers, the better information that is for marketers.
All right, Stefan, any thoughts about VR, brain scans, and marketing?
Yeah, it makes me think of this. There's this episode of Portlandia where the premise of the joke is that the two characters don't realize that the guy that they think they become friends with is actually trying to sell them on a timeshare, and it's this sort of great comedy that comes out of it, the awkwardness of the interaction when they realize that what they thought was an authentic, genuine friendship blossoming was in fact just a sales pitch for a timeshare. And I think it's funny to me that as you integrate advertising and this whole notion of authenticity is what you're striving for, it ends up sort of compromising the whole concept of authenticity. And I think if you could step back from it and witness it happening, I think you would have a similar kind of awkward sensation as in that Portlandia skit where they're trying to exploit that kind of naive misreading of the situation. And I think before too long, that's going to be our entire life. It's going to be a series of seamless sales interactions that we don't recognize as such. And I think that's kind of disturbing. And hopefully somebody's far enough outside of it to still be able to laugh at it. But I'm not sure if we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And we're going to delve more into that when we talk about Maria Callas in a little bit. Before we get there, though, I wanted to highlight a couple of patents that have surfaced from Google that play right into what we're talking about. Two patents are reported by Sydney Fussell at The Atlantic. And you can look at all of what we've reviewed to get ready for the show today and what we're discussing at tagpacker.com/user/thisweekinlaw. We're on episode 446. So all these stories are aggregated there for you. First patent. Google wants to create devices, wants to get a patent for a device that would scan and analyze the surroundings of your home, then offer you content based on what they find. So the example in the article is, suppose they see a Will Smith face on a t-shirt on your closet floor, your device might then say aloud, "You seem to like Will Smith. His new movie is playing in a theater near you." Also, the device would not just look at the specific things that they could possibly target you ads, but more generally sort of, do you have upscale items in your home? What is your fashion taste? So the various things in this patent are not just trying to specifically target you, but generally make conclusions about you based on what's being detected. The second patent is something that parents will hear and go, "Gee, that sounds great," and then hopefully they'll scream and say, "No, I would never do that." The second patent proposes a smart home system that would run the household using sensors and cameras to restrict kids' behavior. So it would listen for things like foul language. And if that happened, the kids would get some sort of warning or punishment. It talks about tying in with your smart lighting system in your home and flashing a red light if something bad occurs. It talks about tracking your children throughout the house and where various things are being accessed. So unauthorized access to the liquor cabinet, for example, could be flagged and detected and immediately notified to the non-present parent, etc. Google is trying to patent this. Mark, what do we say to this?
Yeah. Well, I'm disturbed this might end sort of a childhood rite of passage where you clandestinely take a couple things from the liquor cabinet and you fill it up with water, and then 10 years later your parents discover it. Now Google will just nip that right in the bud. So that'll be a change. And it's like to grow up in this country. More generally, I think a patent doesn't necessarily mean that this technology is going to come to fruition, but it suggests kind of a larger acceptance, I think, of surveillance. So and I'll talk about in the childhood space. So there are toothbrushes, smart toothbrushes, that parents get a report where they can see if children brush their teeth or not. And we've heard, of course, of Barbie that would record people, and other toys that would record kids. And I think this is problematic, particularly with kids, is that maintaining secrets, having a certain amount of autonomy are part of growing up. And you wonder what's left if we do have machines like this in the home. The patent really suggests that surveillance will happen everywhere, including the bedroom. And the bedroom is this very powerful kind of spatial metaphor. You see it referenced in Fourth Amendment jurisprudence a lot, where they talk, well, what if this made into the bedroom? Isn't that a place that we say hands off? And so I think this is really trying to colonize a new space that we've tried to keep off limits, even from commercial actors. But with smart speakers, and now with propositions like this, they're encroaching on that territory now too.
Right, and I think we did a segment on one of the last couple of shows about a CPAP machine that the user discovered was sending information about his sleep patterns back to the home company, and his health insurer, his doctor, he could live with, but other third parties were involved as well. And I feel like with this kind of technology, like the toothbrushes you're mentioning, et cetera, my kid is of orthodontic age, and there's a device that's supposed to speed the efficient working of your braces if you use it. And it phones home to the orthodontist, so they know that whether or not you're using it, and can badger you if you're not. So I think kids are getting acculturated to that kind of thing at a young age, and that maybe that's not the world we want to create. Stefan, any thoughts?
I'm just thinking about the headgear that I consistently lied about wearing, my orthodontist.
Yeah.
And he, I lied about wearing it. He lied about believing me. My teeth are fine. He made some money. The insurance paid for it. Everybody kind of came out ahead in this interaction. And will that still be possible when Google is monitoring it? I don't know.
Right. Finally, in our privacy stories, I wanted to highlight something that listeners sent in, and that when it was originally posted, and then it became a piece in the Washington Post in their On Parenting section, published by, Jillian is the woman this happened to, Jillian Brockwell. And we've talked before on the show about the hazards of tracking people through their pregnancy, and how it can backfire on marketers. And this is just a terrible, sad tale of how it happened here. And she wrote an open letter to tech companies, basically giving a mea culpa to having put all this information about her pregnancy out there, hashtags on Instagram, searches for various products, et cetera, but where she feels that the system really failed her is after her child was stillborn, things got very strange, because she says that when she went back online after, sort of recovering from the terrible, sad event, all of the ads that she was previously getting, of course, were still there. Then she began using the ability to say, no, this ad is no longer relevant to me. And the assumption that was made by the algorithms there was, oh, you've then had the baby, and all kinds of then very happy, glowing, congratulations on your baby, here's something you might need for the baby, sort of advertising started tracking there. And she caps it off with Experian swooping in with the lowest tracking blow of them all. She says, a spam email encouraging me to finish registering the baby with them. Of course, she had never started registering the baby to track his credit throughout the life he will never lead. So I'm just a terrible advertising fail here. and an example of how, I think Stefan is right that businesses want to be helpful and sell their products at the same time, but they wind up possibly doing severe emotional damage to people in this kind of an instance. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, well, it's just a heartbreaking piece, and I like how you mentioned it before. What it made me think of is the Target fiasco a few years ago, where the Target, diagnosed a teenage pregnancy that was undisclosed to Target or even her own family, and they were able to do this through, combining different data, having nothing, no affirmative act on the part of the person that she was actually pregnant, disclosing that to Target. So this reminds me of that, and in some ways, although a much darker scenario, I think what this shows is that the marketing surveillance machine still has a lot of glitches. I point to some dark paths it could take in my book, but it's definitely not foolproof or can just be executed without any flaws at this point. Another example this makes me think of is a few years back, Office Max sent out a mailer based on its data, and in the mailer it said, "Mr. Smith," under it said, "son killed in car crash." Obviously a mistake. They weren't supposed to disclose that to the person. But I think what we should be thinking about is what happens when this does become frictionless, like Stefan was pointing out. What happens when there aren't these glitches in the machine to remind us that it's an advertiser that's watching us, and the algorithm will realize this, and it won't make these mistakes. On the one hand, it won't be inflicting this kind of just all of a sudden emotional harm on this person, which is terrible. On the other hand, there's less capability of resisting when we don't have these kind of bugs in the machine anymore.
Yeah, excellent point. Well, I think that's a good transition to how seamless things are getting. Let's move on to Hollywood and entertainment. I think this is the perfect complement to what we've been talking about, Mark. I spotted this in your Twitter feed. It's a piece on Medium called "Why I Won't Clap for a Hologram." And it talks about attending a concert with a symphony orchestra and another opera singer and a hologram of Maria Callas. So diva Maria Callas is supposedly the star of this show, doing many of her, favorites from various operas. And the author talks about folks in the audience being moved to tears and definitely clapping for the performance, asking for an encore from a holographic image. I mean, he talks about the uncanny valley, references that in the piece, and how there's a moment where the hologram is able to pull off a special effect. She casts some cards into the air that wouldn't, and they freeze. And that wouldn't happen if a real person were standing there on stage, but the audience loved it and ate it up. And, the unreality of it was almost part of the show. So I think this is a great example of how, maybe those nostalgic for Maria Callas's work could get a lot of benefit from this. But I believe it's at the end of this piece, or maybe it's elsewhere in our rundown. There's a discussion of how, so entertainment value, we'll check that one off. But then what might Maria Callas endorse, or who might she endorse, or who might deceased Ronald Reagan endorse? So it does become an interesting thing to consider. Any further thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this piece up. What it made me think of is I was at a conference a few months ago, and in my state of New York, the right of publicity ends at death. Very different than other places. I think in California, it's 70 years or 50 years after the celebrity has died. In Indiana, it's 100 years after death. In Tennessee, the home of Elvis, it lasts forever. And so New York has periodically tried to update its law to reflect these other jurisdictions, and they made a push this year. And what was interesting is, on the one hand, you had the video game industry, and the video game industry lobbied really hard to keep things as is. They didn't want to have to kind of clear rights for deceased celebrities in their games. On the other side, you had the Screen Actors Guild, who very much wanted this. And what they were really worried about is they pointed to the use of Carrie Fisher's likeness in the most recent Star Wars movie. And what they were worried about was kind of all kinds of these recreations, like the Callus recreation, or perhaps without permission, perhaps forcing live actors out of a job, perhaps doing violence to the legacy of these actors in the past. And so they were worried about the law in New York not being prepared to handle this. And I thought that was interesting. I'm not a huge fan of the right of publicity in a lot of ways, but it makes you wonder, what are we worried about? Do we need to protect how we use a celebrity likeness after they've passed on?
Right, because perhaps the estate or whoever winds up holding those rights might not want their deceased family members' name, image, and likeness used in a certain way. But on the other hand, maybe they just would be in for a penny, in for a pound, in it for all they're worth, and let Grandma Maria endorse whatever someone wants her to. What do you think, Stefan?
I think this has the potential to really stifle creativity if it's applied too consistently. And, you get some performance that someone determines is the definitive performance of an opera, and you present that through a hologram form over and over again. You're going to sort of dominate the market and create a narrative around it that people are going to respond to, and it's not going to give space for new people to come up and challenge and reimagine things. And so it's obviously kind of a neat technology, and I think it has some value, but I worry about it as a substitute for a more organic engagement with art, and I think over time it could have a pretty bad effect on creativity, especially if you concentrate ownership of expressions of ideas like this in a few hands, and sort of allow the market to make those representations dominant over time, sort of indefinitely. It's just sort of, in addition to the sort of creepiness that we feel now, which is going to pass as people get used to this, there's just going to be this sort of homogenous, market-driven representation of art that I don't find appealing personally.
Yep, I'm with you. Okay, so I had to put this in, Stefan, because we're back to the laws of premium vodka.
Oh, perfect.
We had an episode called The Laws of Premium Vodka and the Horse. This just involves the vodka, not the horses, and involves Ciroc vodka. Just the poster child for premium vodka marketing and what they've been able to accomplish over recent years. And what they've been able to accomplish is get Ciroc, if that's how you say it, in particular, is 1,700 Instagram and other influencers plugging the vodka without complying with the FTC ad disclosure guidelines, that they have a material partnership with the brand and are being paid or offered various compensations by the brand. Truth in Advertising organization has filed a complaint with the FTC about that. Sean P. Diddy Combs has taken down most of his posts that would have been in violation, but that doesn't mean he's not going to get hopefully more than slapped on the wrist by the FTC, because the damage here is a little bit more than just misleading people into thinking that influencers like the vodka. When you look at the demographics of the people they're reaching, and the fact that there is age gating on alcohol advertising, and the fact that a whole young generation of people not yet of drinking age are fascinated with things like vodka, I think, in a way that they were not when I was growing up, largely because of this kind of positioning and marketing. One of the pieces in our rundown talks about how Sean Combs was able to grow this brand from shipping something like 44,000 cases of vodka a year to over 2 million a year. And that's where they stand now. So you have a whole chapter in your book about this, Mark. What do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think vodka is a great example of kind of classic marketing. And you should correct me if I'm wrong in this, but one thing I have heard is that kind of like unlike other distilled spirits where you can kind of have a more premium brand objectively as far as its qualities than others, vodka is vodka, really. And so you're really buying kind of a lifestyle brand. And that's what Stiddy and Ciroc have really done very successfully here. I think what this particular story points to, I mean, there's a lot of things to say about influencers, but what this particular story points to, I think, is just that this is a big space now. Companies are spending a lot of money on influencer campaigns, and people who know the laws, know the disclosure guidelines of the FTC are often not following them, or following them sometimes and not following them other times. And they think it's worth it, I think, because the FTC only enforces this some of the time. It doesn't enforce it strongly. To be able to present yourself as more authentic, or not to put in that Instagram post that you're sponsored by or advertising the brand, to make it seem more organic, it's worth the risk to them, I think. And that's what this story seems to demonstrate.
Right. And the FTC has been very clear in its guidelines, but influencers continue to, rather than leading off a post plugging vodka, for example, with the hashtag ad or partnership or anything else, they'll put little ellipses and then put all the hashtags down at the bottom. And a viewer just scrolling through their feed might never see that. Stefan, any thoughts on vodka before we move on to the next piece?
I just love that now we have 2 episodes in like the span of 3 months that confirm the basic point about vodka being the perfect sort of mirror into which to stare if you want to understand advertising, because it is this sort of blank slate that we can project our various desires onto. And I just think it's really quite interesting as a marketing concept.
Right, it is. And for those whose youngsters may have been taken in by the marketing and maybe trying to do what Mark referenced earlier, I do have a good parental tip for you that was passed along to me by friends with older children. And that is, you don't mark the bottle in your liquor store at the top. You turn it over, you turn it upside down, and you mark it there. So that... Brilliant, right? Because the kids aren't going to think to turn it over and move the mark. Anyway, maybe now they will. There's one other piece in our rundown about influencer marketing, and I really encourage people to take a look at this one too. It's at Wired, and it talks about, it's titled "Inside the Pricey War to Influence Your Instagram Feed." And the thing that jumped out at me, again, I feel like, kind of know this stuff. What's going to be surprising about this piece? The thing that surprised me about this one is not only, the vast amount of money that is being sunk into influencer marketing, but I think this is something the FTC may have to look closer at. I'm not sure if it would be covered by the existing guidelines as directly as we might want it to be. And that is sort of attack marketing by an influencer who's been paid off by your competitors to then pounce on your product and shred it. And they tell a story in that piece, a very specific example of an eyelashes company that had sent off, or very, very naively pitched one particular influencer. They wanted to review the product, and the influencer bought the product, and they were so excited to see his review, and his review was just withering. And buried in the hashtags at the bottom was a reference to his partnership with competitors of the company itself. So what do you think, Mark? Is that something the FTC is aware of and being sufficiently vigilant about?
That's a good question. I don't have a window into whether the FTC is investigating these kind of pay-per-play, attack posts. It seems like they should. It was very interesting that there was a fixed amount you had to pay one of these big influencers for a supportive post for your own product. Then you had to pay a premium for one of the attack ones on a competitor. Which there's a whole price component of this that's already been baked in. What this made me think is really that on the one hand, the market for influencers is kind of robust. There are these stated prices. There's a lot of people, big brands are feeling not just that maybe they should get into this, but they have to get into it. That was a suggestion in the piece, like, well, you really have no choice if you're in some of these industries, but to hire influencers. But then on the other hand, it's sort of like the Wild West still, because it's so new. One thing I find in a lot of advertising is that it's fairly genteel as far as criticizing competitors. You really have to be careful before you criticize someone in a television ad or a print ad. You have to do it kind of subtly, and often the television networks will have their own rules about what they'll allow as far as criticizing a competitor. But here in this kind of newer space, I think we're seeing it's a bit more of a Darwinian struggle, and they're really kind of there's brass knuckles tactics in this field, which just shows, I think, that it's kind of a new format for advertising.
The other thing I thought was really interesting about this Wired piece is the fact they point out that many of these influencers who are making buckets of money are not very famous celebrities, and that's probably why they're able to do what they're doing. You see a model plugging a premium vodka, and you might assume that there's some sort of commercial relationship there. When someone is such a marketable person in their own right, you might assume that what they're putting on social media, if it's plugging a product, might have some tie back to the brand. But what Wired points out here is that a lot of these people aren't viewed as paid endorsers or salespeople. Even though lots of them are, but as trusted experts, friends, and real people. And that what they say has become so important, I think, because of everything we've been talking about today here on the show, because people have become so jaded and so guarded about the way they're being marketed to, that they crave someone they can trust to tell them, yes, these are darn fine eyelashes, and you should go out and spend your hard-earned money on them because they've tried them and reviewed them, and substitute the product of choice. But I just think it's a sad statement that even the ones who are holding themselves out there as I'm the person you can trust to really get to the bottom of this product issue or service issue are on the take as well, and maybe not in compliance with the disclosures that they're supposed to be making. Stefan, any thoughts?
I see this kind of advertising as a palliative for the late capitalist excesses that surround us, and our anxiety about advertising, I think, is really just a projection of our anxiety with that capitalist superstructure that we're unable to otherwise articulate because we are so enmeshed in it. But we can express anxiety about advertising, and that's how we choose to express what I think is truly a deeper, more structural anxiety.
Yep, I think that's a deeper point you just made there, Stefan. We'll make darned fine eyelashes our second MCLE passphrase of the show. Just as an aside, I mean, the eyelash market is really going off right now. I know, plenty of totally normal, smart, seemingly sensible people who are obsessed with how their eyelashes look. And I don't know what that says about us culturally, but maybe it relates to what you were just saying, Stefan. So we're going to look in a moment at what Washington might think about all this or not think about it. But first, we're going to look at a story that we've been following and a new development there in the Redigi case. So for longtime listeners of the show, you've probably heard of Redigi. We've talked about it a few times. They are the company that is attempting to have the first sale doctrine which is an exception to copyright infringement. And they are attempting to have that apply to digital goods like songs that you might purchase from iTunes. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals issued a decision against Redigi yesterday and rejected their fair use argument, largely rejected their for sale doctrine argument, and found that digital goods aren't like paper goods or CDs or albums, that they weren't going to let Redigi's arguments fly. Any detail you want to add here, Mark?
Yeah, just maybe 2 points, right? So one is that I think this really tracked to what the district court said too, and the district court said just, well, look, if you're making a reproduction, that's not going to let you avail yourself of the first sale right. So even though Redigi, argued, look, we strip the music file off your computer when you upload it to us. Once a packet of information goes and puts that song up in the cloud, the packet's removed from your computer. So in other words, you don't have the song in two places at the same time. The court said, well, maybe that's true, but the version of the song that has gone up to the cloud, Redigi's cloud, is different from the original one you got from iTunes. Therefore, a copy has been made. Therefore, no first sale right applies because the first sale right doesn't apply to reproduction. And so really it's about formalism and not substance. And I think some people could see this and say, well, this is how we buy our music in the digital age. And wasn't the first sale right created for a reason? And now you're kind of blowing a hole in that. And the court's response was, well, look, this is what the law is. And if you have a problem, ask Congress. So not really willing to stick its neck out or do anything creative here. And then the second thing I just thought was interesting about the opinion was it just raced through fair use. So Redigi made an argument that, well, look, we're kind of allowing you to resell this, and there's a way to put it up in the cloud. Isn't this somehow a fair use? And the court just kind of very quickly ticked through the four factors and said, no fair use here. You're using it for the same proposition as when you originally got the music off of iTunes. And most importantly, under factor 4, this is going to hurt the market for the original music. This is going to let people buy that song for 79 cents when they had to buy, but maybe buy it originally for $1.19. That hurts the song recording owner. So no fair use.
Yeah, interesting case. There's some speculation that it could be a Supreme Court case at some point. If the Supreme Court gets sufficiently exercised about where and how the first sale doctrine should apply. So stay tuned and keep an eye out for future developments there. Stefan, any thoughts?
I still need to dive into this decision. It's an interesting one. So I don't have a sort of deep understanding yet of the basis for the court's reasoning. That being said, I think this really illustrates as I think Mark pointed out, this is really it sounds like it's a very formal opinion, and one that if you were to explain to the common music listener, they would be confused and frustrated, I think, by the result here. And so whenever that happens, you have to ask yourself whether or not the correct approach here is going to be legislative change. And I don't know if that's possible to address this, but just reminds me of when I was a kid. I used to go to the secondhand record store near my house where I grew up, and it was right around the time when Napster was really first making a splash. And I remember being very confused as to why there was a perception of harm resulting from Napster, but not from going to the secondhand record store where I was just buying, copies of things that where the sale was not being realized by the artist or the record company. It was just going to this, local dealer. So similar issue here. I wonder if my thoughts will change when I dive into it, maybe, but I always kind of find it interesting whenever the law touches on something that so many people use every day and have intuitions about, and the law results in something that is contrary to those common intuitions. It often suggests to me that there's something wrong.
Yeah, it feels like some version of digital exceptionalism because real world objects are subject to the first sale doctrine.
Right.
All right. Let us move on to look at what's been going on in Washington about some of the privacy and other big tech company concerns that we've discussed on the show. Google's CEO Sundar Pichai appeared before the House Judiciary Committee this week and was asked a lot of questions about Google's bias and wasn't asked a lot of questions about Google's disclosure and data sharing. That seems to be my major takeaway from his testimony. There was one representative, Karen Handel, who asked Pichai if he thought there were any categories of data that users should have to opt in to have collected. And he sidestepped that question. Instead of answering it, he said, I think a framework for privacy where users have a sense of transparency, a sense, by the way, of transparency, control, and a choice, and a clear understanding of the choices they need to make is very good for consumers, was his answer to that question. And over on Twitter, oh gosh, I can't pronounce this person's name, Daisuke Wakabayashi has a post where he says the question I wish one person would ask is, why don't you commit to making sure that data collection is turned off by default? Don't put the burden on users to choose privacy. Let them choose data collection. And folks in his comment chimed in and said, but no one would ever choose that. So the whole system breaks down. And others in the EU chimed in and said, yeah, you know, we're trying that here and we're learning how to apply those kinds of restrictions. So Mark, do you have any thoughts on putting Google's CEO on the spot?
Yeah, a couple. I do think that despite, his kind of dodging and weaving on a lot of the questions, it shows that things have changed since Google's previous CEO, Eric Schmidt, said, well, you only have anything to worry about with regard to privacy if you have something to hide. Now there is at least lip service being paid to privacy concerns when you use Google and other platforms. So I think I don't know if that's progress, but at least it shows that there's at least an attempt to pay attention to these concerns. On the one hand, I'm sympathetic to the idea that this was sort of a missed opportunity with a lot of the people in Congress talking about bias, whether among the actual algorithm or among the workers at Google, and favoring some news stories over the others. We could have gotten to more important issues about competition and antitrust and tracking. On the other hand, I do think that it is an important issue to the extent that Google is trying to figure out how to balance, its ranking of the things you see and taking into account truthfulness. It's not as simple as things being true or not true. I think sensibly they weight more heavily the New York Times article that's heavily sourced versus Breitbart, which is just hardly sourced, versus some Pizzagate conspiracy, which isn't sourced at all. But in between all these things are gradations that have to be analyzed, and those things aren't really transparent to people. And I'm not sure what the right recipe is or how you fix this. It's a thorny problem, but I do think that interrogating these things out in the open makes sense.
Yeah, nobody understands, and Google doesn't tell people precisely how their algorithm works and how they make sure that if they're using inbound links as a way of weighting things, that they're making sure that those links are legitimate and not paid for and not part of an influencer marketing campaign like we discussed previously. The other thing I would have loved to hear someone ask about is the 2 patents that we discussed earlier on the show. That would have been topical. Stefan, any thoughts?
I just wish one of the Democrats had said on the record that facts have a liberal bias. I think that would have ended the hearing pretty quickly. To Mark's point about sourcing, I mean, I think it's a very relevant point. There's a sort of false equivalency, I think, that very naturally arises when you have a structured bipartisan system. I think it was Elie Mystal from above the law who made a crack about the Republican power structure essentially being an affirmative action program for mediocre white people, and that might be going a little too far, but that I think what we're seeing play out in this hearing is that dynamic funneled through what is ostensibly a conversation about privacy and technology and bias, and I think. I feel a little bad for Google CEO there because he was essentially subjected to kind of partisan wrangling that had very little to do with the core of what they're really there to talk about. And I think, it's not really a missed opportunity because they did exactly what they set out to do, which is some political theater. And so, yeah, he just sort of wasted his time, I guess. Which isn't to say that the concerns aren't serious. It's just, is that really the forum to address them? I'm not sure.
No, probably not. All right. Well, one thing that Congress is being urged by one scholar to consider against the framework of everything that we've been discussing today on the advertising front is whether advertising should be treated and regulated as experimentation on human subjects. I thought this was a fascinating piece. It is by Tamara Piety in the Advertising and Society Quarterly, one of its recent, if not the most recent issue. And she talks about the fact, it pretty much harkens back to the story that we did earlier about the woman with the stillborn child, that there can be real adverse consequences to people from advertising, and yet they have not opted into this whole regime, at least not consciously or meaningfully so. And what she says toward the end of her piece is, I hope that by comparing the way we approach research on human subjects in other areas to that done by the persuasion industry, we can see more clearly the parallels between that research and marketing practices. If the commercial speech environment makes lab rats of us all, it is alarming how little thought appears to have been given to what sort of society this experiment may be creating. Do you think this has any legs, Mark?
Yeah, I hope so. I like Tamara's work a lot and know her well. I think the one thing that we don't quite realize is, in other areas, there are very tight restrictions on what you can do with people. So I work at a university, and any time where I'm going to interview somebody or something like that, I've got to go through a cumbersome IRB process. And people complain about that, and it is red tape to cut through. But compare that with what's going on where you have mass experiments. So I think one she probably talks about is the Facebook emotional contagion experiments, where over 700,000 people had their news feeds manipulated. So some got more sad posts, some got more happy posts, and they wanted to see if those people would in turn, become sadder, post more sad things themselves if they got more sad things in their news feed. It was true. They'd get more sad. Maybe that's not surprising, but they definitely messed with people's emotional state without having to notify them before or after. So I think, we should take seriously that there is real consequences to advertising, and it's not just something that we can kind of think it's in the background of our lives and it doesn't affect us. Whether it actually has legs in the way that we'd see laws or requirements, that there'd be kind of IRB-like structures, I don't know. But I have seen serious people propose, and I think even in some talks, meetings in the Obama administration, about some structuring of corporate research boards, where at least you'd have some people, maybe an outsider or two on these boards, who could say, oh, wait, you're going to do that with these subjects, these commercial subjects? Maybe we should think about this first, or maybe there should be some idea of informed consent as opposed to just clicking OK on a large piece of digital boilerplate. So whether it has legs, I don't know, but I hope it has some legs.
What do you think, Stefan? Any chance of this becoming how we regulate the advertising industry?
As a practical matter, no. I think it's an interesting thought experiment, though. To the point about people being happy when they post happy stories and get lots of likes, and sad when they get sad stories and so on. With my own sort of private social media, I have a tendency to sort of swing back and forth between very traditional posts of, oh, look at this thing that I did, praise me, and sort of jamming the signal a little bit with sort of ridiculous posts that don't necessarily make a lot of sense. And last night on Instagram, I posted a video of me cutting through some spam, and like literally the product spam, food product, and it's amazing to me watching sort of just how people react to these different posts. Like if a picture goes up of something, very, traditionally socially appropriate for social media, you get kind of this like rote series of likes that kind of don't mean anything. Whereas if you post something like yourself cutting through a block of spam, you kind of get a different reaction from people. And there really is no purpose to it whatsoever. And it's a callback, I think, to kind of absurd humor that was possible in different forums in the past. And I think one of the unfortunate things about social media and the way that it's sort of dovetailed with advertising is the way it has taken private moments that could be very meaningful and has rendered them sort of banal in a way that you can only really escape from by doing something banal and making it seem meaningful. And so I've actually kind of observed this in my own social media use, where if something happens that objectively by any traditional notion should be meaningful, it just becomes kind of flat and homogenous as it kind of enters into social media. But if you take something completely out of left field that really doesn't make a lot of sense as a indicator of anything meaningful, you put it on social media, all of a sudden that distorted context sort of jostles you out of your sort of sense of complacency. And so I think as a way of getting people to orient themselves in the present again, I think you can play with these platforms to make sort of interesting expressions, but that doesn't seem to be the direction most people are going, and it worries me that people's lives are kind of being reduced to this a very closed feedback loop between things they do and things they want, and projecting that out to the public as a sort of commercial exchange. Like I find it just very draining on every level, and so hopefully, we find some way out of it that's practical. But I think the solution proposed here is probably more academic than realizable.
That was beautifully put, and I'm really hoping you write the book on this, on upending people's expectations of social media use and making it a tool for creativity and good. All right. On that note, we did want to end this show on a positive note. Mark ends his book on a positive note. And his point at the end of the book is that resistance to ad creep is not futile. So, Mark, explain to us exactly how one might resist and why it's not futile.
Yeah. So I think one thing is just being aware. So, seeing a program like this, or just being more cognizant of the advertising that's around us. For me, it was really just when I had kids and watched how they were influenced, and how even attempts, to quarantine them from advertising weren't very successful. It was coming at them in schools. It was coming at them in different, technical environments. That made me think more about, just how important advertising is and how it affected us. And I think being aware is part of it. And then I guess the second thing I'd say is, awareness is first, and then it requires a certain amount of mobilization. I think we consistently see elected officials, have not been willing to go very far in this, at least in the aggregate. But if there is a mobilization, then perhaps there can be some change. So I think just one hopeful thing I saw just yesterday is a group of 15, I think, senators proposed a law that would require online service providers to really have these fiduciary duties. So we'd end this kind of system where basically if you have notice and consent, it lets Google or Facebook or Twitter or whoever do what they want. Instead, there'd be a duty of confidentiality, a duty of loyalty. And the bill is kind of loose and doesn't fill in all the blanks, but what these things would mean. But as I learned in some postings that the senator who sponsored it said, he wants feedback because he wants these to be meaningful categories. This isn't meant to kick the can down the road. He really wants to have some teeth to what the duty of confidentiality with someone's data means, the duty of loyalty, what that would mean, what you can do as far as giving information to third parties, kind of going back to our locational tracking story and these apps giving information to other people. So I think if the public gets aware of what's going on and then just tries to manifest that with, different kind of behaviors, trying to switch to different platforms, writing their elected officials, then maybe there's a potential for really making some change. That's my hopeful note to end things on here.
I do think that you're onto something there, Mark. That is our tip of the week, by the way, that resistance is not futile. And further evidence of that is Marketing Week's inclusion of the following as one of its marketing trends for 2019. They write that the era of social media self-regulation is over. So I do feel like individuals are making their voices heard, that they're concerned about this kind of thing, and lawmakers are starting to pay attention, and we will see more done to address some of the concerns that we've raised today. Our resource of the week is, of course, Mark's book, ADcreep from Stanford University Press. Really good read. It's a page turner, Mark. I'm enjoying it very much. I'm not done with it yet, but it will definitely be on my holiday reading list. Thank you so much for writing it and for joining us today. We, of course, need to conclude the show with a very marketing-related animal selfie of the week. Oh, this implicates rights of publicity and marketing and everything else. Apparently in 2014, National Geographic put together an ad campaign that I hadn't seen before. I can't believe we haven't seen it before, having done animal selfies of the week for so many weeks here on This Week in Law. But it was an ad campaign all about wild animal selfies. And the point of the ad campaign was to get people to buy National Geographic's nature images. Their tagline is, "There are lots of terrible animal pictures out there. Shouldn't you buy the best from us?" And so we have a gorilla taking a selfie in the bathroom mirror, a panda taking a phone selfie in an elevator, and I believe there's one more. Yes, there's a koala at his or her boudoir taking a selfie, and a grizzly bear who appears also to be in the bathroom mirror once again. So a great collection of very posed animal selfies from the folks at National Geographic and their marketing people. There's a kangaroo too. Didn't want to miss the kangaroo. So very cute group of selfies there. I think we can go ahead and say that PETA would not have much standing in these. These appear to be either photoshopped or otherwise digitally manipulated. Hard to say that any of these animals actually took these photos, though. I don't know. Proof could demonstrate otherwise. Any thoughts, Stefan?
I thought that koala was pretty racy. I wasn't sure about that particular image, but the rest of them, seem pretty innocuous to me.
Yes, they're pretty cute. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Mark Bartholomew, professor at the University of Buffalo School of Law and author of ADcreep, for joining us here today. What a great discussion. Really enjoying your book and really enjoyed our talk today.
I did too. Thanks a lot for having me on.
And Stefan Szpajda, looking forward to going into the holiday break here, but just wanted to thank you so much for all your contributions to the show in 2018.
It's been so much fun. I don't know what I'm going to do for the next few weeks. I'm sort of hooked on this format now. I'll have to just talk into a mirror or something.
You could then send the photo to National Geographic and see if they'll use it in an advertising campaign. As long as we're thanking people at the end of the year, the whole reason that Mark Bartholomew joined us this week is because our wonderful intern who's been with the show since April of this year, Connor Flynn, actually was your student at University of Buffalo School of Law, Mark, and recommended you for the show. And I'm so glad that you did, and that he was able to inveigle you to come join us here today.
Connor's very persuasive. Connor. I'm glad he did convince me.
Yes, thank you so much, Connor. And really thanks to all of our interns throughout the years, folks who have raised their hands and volunteered to help out with This Week in Law, starting with Franklin Graves and moving on. Let's see if I actually can recite all the interns. We've got Franklin, we've got Sando. Matt Curtis, of course, started out as an intern and began co-hosting. He was not able to make it with us today. So thank you, Matt, for all of your help. Connor Flynn, of course, and Rebecca Klosner was an intern for the show as well. And really, it's been phenomenal to have their assistance as well as throughout the show. Really just been so blessed with amazing co-hosts. We had Evan Brown on last week, and longtime listeners will remember, of course, Sarah Pearson and Colette Vogel. Matt, of course, Mike Keys, who is a managing partner of the office that Stefan practices law in, Dorsey and Whitney up there in Seattle, and Emery Rohn, who, again, started out as an intern and wound up behind the mic at my behest. So really, they've all been wonderful contributors to the show, as well as all of you. Thank you so much for just an amazing 12 years doing This Week in Law and an amazing 2018. We hope you have a wonderful holiday break, and we hope that you take a very good care and pay attention to who's advertising to you in what ways and what could be done with your data. Great being here with you all today. We'll talk to you in the future.